Well, welcome to the 700 Club. A win-win. That's how President Trump describes his Middle East peace plan. While he calls it the deal of the century, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas calls it, quote, the slap of the century. So, deal or no deal? Chris Mitchell has that report.
With Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his side, President Trump presented a plan that he believes will succeed where so many others have failed.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides, a realistic two-state solution that resolves the risk of Palestinian statehood to Israel's security. Today, Israel has taken a giant step toward peace.
Netanyahu praised President Trump's plan as history in the making.
And on this day, you too have charted a brilliant future for Israelis, Palestinians, and the region by presenting a realistic path to a durable peace.
The plan calls for Jerusalem to remain Israel's undivided capital. It calls for Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. It calls for a Palestinian state, but only if Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state, renounce terrorism, and stop paying convicted terrorists. For the first time, Trump's peace plan includes a map showing what a future Palestinian state would look like. Here on the ground, Palestinians rioted in Ramallah while Israeli troops remain on high alert. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas immediately rejected it, calling it the slap of the century.
After the nonsense that we have heard today, we say 1,000 times, no, 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 to the deal of the century.
But some Sunni Arab nations surrounding Israel, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, have issued positive statements about the plan. Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg, who has met many of these leaders, believes they may chart their own course.
I've had conversations, as you know, with a lot of these folks. I sense this is a question they're really asking. Should we start moving towards full peace with Israel, even before the Palestinian issue is resolved, the way Egypt did in 1979, the way Jordan did in 1994?
Back here in Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu faces major legal and political challenges. Politically, many of his key supporters oppose this plan. And legally, Israel's Attorney General officially indicted Netanyahu on 3 separate counts. All this happens just weeks before the Israeli national elections on March 2nd. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Well, we'll look eagerly. I think the president's come up with something. Everybody's been talking about it. If the other Arab nations say, look, we've had enough of this, these Palestinians are just, whistling in the graveyard. We're not going to listen to them anymore. We're not going to let them destroy our peace in our nation because of this group. But the Palestinian Authority is run by a radical group. I mean, let's face it, Hamas and those who've taken over Gaza, and they're not going to make peace with Israel ever. They're dedicated to the destruction of Israel. So the Palestinians have got to give that up and acknowledge the existence of a Jewish state as a permanent part of the Middle East. And until they do, they don't have peace. Well, in other news, how long will the impeachment trial drag on? Republicans had hoped to wrap it up this week, but now it's in question. John Jessup has more.
That's right, Pat. A day after President Trump's defense team finished its arguments, Republican senators are wavering on calling more witnesses, potentially making the trial last much longer. Abigail Robertson brings us the latest from Capitol Hill.
President Trump's defense team spent almost 10 hours arguing this is a partisan impeachment and issued an ominous warning to the senators who will decide Trump's fate.
Danger, danger, danger. These articles must be rejected.
But Democrats claim the defense is weak and believe there's cracks in the Republican Party.
I think a number of my Republican colleagues are really searching their souls. I know of a couple who are very close to saying they want witnesses, and certainly John Bolton is the one who should testify.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell reportedly told Republicans he does not have the votes to block witnesses, while Senator Lindsey Graham cautions Democrats if witnesses are called, the floodgates will open.
If people want witnesses, we're going to get a lot of witnesses. There'll be 51 Republican votes to call Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, the whistleblower, and the DNC staffer at a very minimum.
And in New Jersey, supporters started lining up Sunday for President Trump's Tuesday night rally that drew tens of thousands.
While we are creating jobs and killing terrorists, the congressional Democrats are obsessed with demented hoaxes, crazy witch hunts, and deranged partisan crusades.
Senators will submit written questions to the defense and prosecution over the next 2 days, beginning today. When that ends, the Senate will move on to the contentious vote over whether to call witnesses. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abigail. Pat, back to you.
I want to say something. You know, in a trial, here's the way it works. You have the witnesses, you have the cross-examination, you have the facts, you have the police, you have the FBI, you have whoever brings you the evidence, and you deliberate the evidence before a jury and a judge, and then on the strength of that, there is a decision. Either there is an exoneration or a conviction. Now, the lawyers for the defense can then go and ask for an appeal, and they have an appeal, and the appeal goes to what's called an appellate court, and the appellate court then has the record. They do not call witnesses. They do not relitigate the case. They take the record, they take the judicial charge to the jury, they take all of the facts to see if it was in accordance with the law, whether the verdict is upheld by the law in place, or whether there was a violation of the law. If there was a violation of the law, then they'll say, well, we remand that back for a retrial or what have you. Either that or they affirm it. But that's really what we're looking at. The Senate is acting as an appellate court. And the idea that you've got to relitigate the case, bring in new witnesses, is just nonsense. They're supposed to consider the record that has been brought to them by the Democrats who have impeached the president. And now it comes to the Senate to decide, was that legitimate? And then the people have argued it, the people on the part of the defense and those on the part of the prosecution. They've had hours and hours to debate what it is. Now the Senate should decide. They don't need further witnesses. You don't open a trial again in any kind of a case. In a criminal case, you don't reopen the trial in the appellate division. The record stands, and the decision is made on the basis of the record. Now, the Democrats had all the time they needed to get a record together, but they were in such a rush. They said, you know, the fate of our nation is dependent on us indicting the president. And having indicted him, then they said, well, we're sorry, we've got to wait and see how the Senate's going to handle this before we send up the articles of impeachment. The whole thing is a sham and a joke. But I want to say again, in an appellate trial of a normal trial, the appellate court does not take, quote, witnesses. It does not reopen the case for facts. It decides on the basis of the record presented to it. And that's what we're dealing with here. So all this business of calling for witnesses, we've got to have more witnesses. Well, this isn't that kind of a trial, I don't think. I think the Senate is supposed to act as a grand jury, as an appellate court. And Jay and his team are making one argument, Schiff and Nadler are making their argument, and then they're going to have questions back and forth. The appellate court will ask questions, which they do in a proceeding, whether it's before the Supreme Court or an appellate court. The judges can ask the litigants about, well, tell me what this is and how do you agree with that? And they talk back and forth, and they certainly do in the Supreme Court. And having done so, then they deliberate, but they do not, quote, call witnesses. So, you know, there's all this talk about, well, to be fair, you've got to have witnesses. That's nonsense. That isn't the way we do it. So I just want to point that out. I heard an announcer on a radio station acting so learnedly, and he didn't know what he was talking about. John?
Pat, residents in the Caribbean islands are breathing a sigh of relief after a large earthquake shook the region Tuesday, though it did little damage. The 7.7 tremor hit a shallow depth between Cuba and Jamaica. The shaking felt more than 400 miles away, all the way up to Miami, where people fled from buildings and into the streets.
The alarm started sounding and they were told us to go downstairs to the stairs.
We thought it was a bombing, we thought it was a shooting, we didn't know what it was.
In Jamaica, children were forced to evacuate their schools while water burst out of containment systems and rocked the pools and resorts of Grand Cayman. Thankfully, no injuries and no tsunami. Tuesday's event follows a series of quakes that hit Puerto Rico last month, which sits along the same set of tectonic plates. Nearly 3 weeks after the 6.4 earthquake shook the United States territory, about 80% of schools are still closed in Puerto Rico, leaving 240,000 school children, Pat, unable to go back to classes.
Just a quick comment. A 7.7 earthquake is a monster. It is a huge, they go up geometrically when they go from 6 to 7 and 7 to 8 and so forth. It's not just one time up. It is like twice or 3 times the strength. A 7.4 is a monster earthquake, which means the tectonic plates under this part of the world are shaking very badly. And you have the North American plates, you have the Pacific plate, and you have the so-called ring of fire. And it looks like the whole earth is the crust of the earth is shaking. So it's a very serious thing. Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't you think there were, if it was so huge, why wasn't there a tsunami then, I wonder?
Well, apparently it didn't hit enough in the ocean to cause one, but...
It wasn't close enough to land.
Well, I guess that's it, but the tsunami comes with it when it's underground, and like we had over there in Indonesia a little while ago. That was a huge tsunami because the earthquake took place in the ocean, and it was, I guess, at a depth underneath the water. And I'm not sure exactly where the tsunami comes from, but the one that we need to keep our eyes on is that Cascadia zone up there in North America, near Oregon. That is a major, major fault, and people have been looking at, they've had some prophetic word that something serious is going to happen. Well, but that's the tsunami that comes about. I guess, I don't know whether it's the depth of the water where it happens or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you would think it would be because it was close to the landmass that's the tsunami would be greater, but I don't know either.
The water has to do, I think it had the depth of the explosion, but I'm not an expert on that one. So but all I know is 7.7 is a monster, and we've got to help those poor people in Puerto Rico. Fortunately, this didn't hurt the Caymans. It didn't do much damage in Cuba. It was out in the water. But I guess it wasn't deep enough to bring forth a tsunami.
Thank goodness.
All right, John, what's up?
Pat, more than 200 Americans are on their way home from Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. The plane chartered by the United States government stopped in Anchorage, Alaska, where passengers underwent a medical screening before passing through immigration and reboarding the plane. The CDC reportedly plans to temporarily house them after their arrival at an air reserve base in Riverside, California. More than 130 people, all of them in China, have died from the coronavirus. Nearly 6,000 infections reported worldwide. There are 5 recorded cases here in the United States, and authorities are testing about 100 patients for the virus. And Pat, an emotional high for the passengers on that plane. The entire flight erupted into cheers when they were welcomed back home.
It's wonderful, but as our health reporter said at our last program, when we talked about it, influenza has killed a whole lot more people than coronavirus. And we don't make that big a thing, but this thing is hit so suddenly, it's going to devastate the economic aspect of China. They're having to shut down tourism. They're shutting down a number of industries. People are out of work. They've put quarantines around various parts of the country, and it's going to hurt them. So economically, the effect of coronavirus is going to be much more serious than the actual numbers of people that catch it. Okay.